All right, welcome to another episode of the Providence Friarcast. One day late, and that's my fault. Joined again by Brendan Desrochers up here next to me, and then Brian Reddy down below. Another one-on-one week, gentlemen. It seems to be a tradition as since we've started the show. A lot of these one-on-one performances and/or horrific 0-3 performances, whatever it is. But Providence 1-1 last week with an early week win at DePaul to open Big East play, kind of in a weird part of the schedule, with a road game and a game that was literally a roller coaster of emotions that ended up in overtime with what seemed on paper to be a comfortable 7-point win. But in overtime, Bryce Hopkins with 36 minutes looked pretty good. Fast forward to Saturday, playing St. Bonaventure at Mohegan Sun in a game that I think fans were looking forward to maybe being a momentum point to go 2-0, seeming to fully turn the page on the 0-3 battle for Atlantis. And then shortly before tip-off, the news breaks that Bryce Hopkins is not going to play due to knee soreness, is what I saw officially reported, I think, before the game from Kevin McNamara. And Providence goes on to lose in pretty much wire-to-wire fashion. They just played pretty bad in the first half, tried to come back, but it was too little too late to lose to St. Bonaventure and improve to 0-3 on the season against the Atlantic 10, inexplicably. Not even the three best teams in the league, although St. Bonaventure, I think, is better than Davidson, for example. But another week in which we saw confusion about Bryce Hopkins, another week in which we saw confusion about lineups, even in the DePaul game with a win. Just seemed like there was a lot of unclear situations. And one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is the word learning has been used a lot. I was listening to the Kim English radio show a little bit earlier in his sort of first few minutes with John Rook on WPRO, and he has said this a lot in the post games as well. A lot of talk about learning. The players are still learning, he says, because they're young and they're transfers. And I would posit that perhaps Kim is doing more learning on the job than maybe was understood of the fan base after all the fury of him being hired last year on the heels of Ed Cooley leaving and the run they had last year with Devin Carter. So we're learning, everyone's learning, and we're not going to judge. We might judge a little, just to be clear on this program. But there's a lot of learning happening, and curious, Brendan, your thoughts on the 1-on-1 week.
Oof, coming me first. So on the one hand, I think DePaul for me was a kind of a very maddening experience as a viewer. But on the other hand, if you just take a step back, they played a team on the road, a team that was favored, a team that led by 8 with like 4 minutes to go. And they went on a big run and they won in overtime. And played very good defense in doing so against a team that was known for being a three-point shooting team. David Skogman went 6 for 10. The rest of the team went 5 for 23. So at a macro level, if you take like a little bit of step back and put like a layer of like gauze over it, you're like, okay, well, 1-0 in conference, road win against like it's not your older brothers DePaul, maybe, although maybe they're not really much better than. Maybe they're not that good. We'll see. They got smoked by St. John's tonight, but Providence, we'll see what that's like on Friday. In game, I think it was the micro was hard to watch. The way that they played offense, really relying on Bensley Joseph and Bryce Hopkins to provide most of the offense. Some nice shot making from Jaden Pierre as well, but also some bad turnovers. While Wesley Cardet, I mean, sometimes like I'm thinking back, wow, this is like 7 days ago. Remembering the turnovers that Wesley Cardet and especially Jabri Abdurrahim had, just like kind of incomprehensible. Coach English made a good decision to switch from Kreese to Oswin at center because Kreese was having trouble getting out on Skogman and wasn't able to make him pay on the other end. So I think that there was, when you're watching the game, you're like, wow, we look really bad. The offense looks terrible, and it was terrible. The defense looks pretty good. Why are we playing certain guys? Ryan Mila, we'll talk about him, I think, more later because of how he played against St. Bonaventure. He came in, played 4 minutes, got in the post and defended Skogman. He was giving up 5 inches to him, got a couple rebounds. Everything was kind of flowing a bit better with him, and played 4 minutes first half, didn't play second half at all. Rich Barron was the choice over him, but Barron did play pretty well, especially defensively down the stretch. So the DePaul game was like, okay, we won. It didn't make you feel really great, but a win is better than a loss, and a road win in the Big East shouldn't be taken for granted. We've lost at home to worse DePaul teams, and we've lost on the road to worse DePaul teams. The St. Bonaventure, with Bryce not playing, again, similar to Atlantis, I don't know how that affected the team, especially the players. It must be a bit confusing for them to not know from game to game whether Bryce is going to play. I think everyone, once he came back, thought he was going to keep playing. Obviously, he had piled up some minutes in a couple of the recent games. And in this game, it was kind of the opposite. The defense was really bad. And I know Brian did really the Lord's work. I think he might have been at the game and also rewatched the game twice afterwards. I could barely get through watching it on delay and being able to fast forward through the commercials, praying that we would somehow find a way to come back. No one could guard Melvin Council, who now he loves playing Friars. He played well, even though his team got blown out when he was at Wagner last year. And I'll try to keep it pretty brief, but we also give 19 offensive rebounds. Our starting lineup combined for 8 defensive rebounds. Kreist had 4 off the bench in 9 minutes. I kind of barely remember him playing, honestly, but at least he hit the defensive glass. They got 20 free throws, and free throw fouling and allowing for this to become kind of a problem for the Friars this year. They're 218th in the country in free throws allowed. And that really has started to become a problem more. I didn't really see it coming, but it was a problem against Davidson. It was a problem against Oklahoma. And it also was a problem against St. Bonaventure. And this is not a great offensive team. They need to play better defense. The Bonnies aren't exactly a great offensive team. But I'll stop rambling. I don't. That's not a big picture. That's just words. And I want to hear some of Brian's words.
I got the same thing to say. One of the things that's frustrating is a couple of games we started off slow and come back, but this week, like I said, I did watch too much of the games. I watched both games twice on TV, and I was at the Mohegan on Saturday. Is that we have this inexplicable drought in the middle of the first half. I think DePaul went on an 18-2 run against us halfway through the first half. We went from a 6-point lead to a 10-point deficit. And then we were tied early with St. Bonaventure, and we went on an 18-5. They went on an 18-5 run. We're just digging ourselves in these holes, and it's like you're chasing the rest of the game. And the same thing happened. I think we started 8-0 down to Oklahoma. And then the other 2 games in the Bahamas, they were over quickly because we just got out of holes that we weren't going to dig out of. And it's just maddening that a team that Mike mentioned on the show tonight, Kim talked about defense, but it's like we're digging holes right at the beginning that are making it difficult, if not impossible, to get out of. In URI, we jumped out to a big lead and then gave it all right away, and then in the second half they went on another run. It's like we're just too vulnerable and too susceptible to these runs.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too that it's interesting because this is sort of a slow starts. If you close your eyes and you just hear the words slow starts, rushing back to win, second half comebacks, doesn't know how to manage a lineup, too many players are playing, nobody knows their role. This could be an Ed Cooley team, ladies and gentlemen. And I know that might hurt some people's earballs to hear, but given we were sold this Kim English coming in, he's going to be high-powered offense, shoot a lot of threes, and Ed Cooley is always thought of as the stodgy guy running the flex, which also was not true, but at least at the scale that people believed to be the case. But I think the interesting thing for me in thinking more about this sort of to Brendan's use of the word macro, I think is a good one in this sense, because this is a little more kind of state of the program again, which is the second time we've done this, and like this is the 4th episode, I think. So not great. Middle of December to do two sort of, you're like just grasping for straws to figure out who is this team, who is this coach, who is this program right now. And you know, coming into this year, I think after the year that was last year, you kind of thought, well, pretty good spot. Obviously, Bryce goes down in early January, and they probably should have been in the tournament, looking back at the committee. So maybe Josh Oduro's baby comes a few days late and he goes to the Butler game and they win that game and maybe they're in. But it's just so, the bounce of the ball here and there, they should have probably been in the tournament. They weren't in the tournament. So you think about that year differently. Kim was the first year coach to win 20 or more games, I think. I'm pretty sure that's a correct stat. So there's all this positivity coming into the season. Bryce is back, although it's unclear exactly when he'll be back and how close to 100% he will be, if he will be 100%. And I think some of the things that I am most frustrated with is not necessarily the play on the court as much, because I think some of that gets oftentimes misconstrued by people when they don't play well, and then you look at it and say, well, they missed a lot of open shots. Like, they had good looks, the offense was generating good looks, and I'm not saying that's all the time, because they also have struggled with, I find to be true, getting open looks. The player movement has been a big thing in the fan base, and everyone's clipping these videos of players standing around while one guy dribbles. And Bensley, when he's been good Bensley and he has those big games, it's often, you look at it, it's like a little bit of the Superman drive stuff, which is not sustainable, obviously, because it's just the kind of thing that doesn't meet the standard, is how I would describe it. Because Kim, that's another thing he says a lot, and he said it in a lot tonight with John Rook, is that the players are all learning, and they're learning, I think, specifically what it means to play to his standard. I would ask if he's learning how to coach to a standard, because he seems to be the kind of person that has a very deep belief in a philosophy. And I think maybe something that we thought was the case, where he's this finished product, because he's a great recruiter, and there's nothing to take away from that. I think he is a very good recruiter. He connects with kids. He makes things happen that you might not believe could happen at Providence. And even under Ed Cooley, there was a lot of on-court success, but recruiting had really fallen off the last several years. I think there's no doubt about that. And we've seen recruiting ramp up again under Kim. So the recruiting piece of it is to the side, but he was a great recruiter as an assistant. That doesn't mean he's going to be a great head coach. I'm not saying he's not a great head coach. I mean, he's not a great head coach right now. I think he would say that. But that's, to me, the expectation that he's going to come in and be this great head coach right away, I think was probably something that shouldn't have been the expectation. And I think everyone was still kind of running on adrenaline after the way things ended, with Ed Cooley leaving, going to Georgetown, all the vitriol, and then Kim comes in, and he's recruiting immediately and bringing in kids, and then they have that year last year. So just to kind of circle around to where I started, I think what I'm most concerned about is, are we underestimating how much learning Kim has to do as a head coach in year 2 at the high major level, year 4 overall? Are we putting too much expectation that is unfair to him and unfair to the fan base's expectation? Or are we in the era of NIL, where we were talking before the show about, there's a rumor that Bryson Tiller is going to enroll early at Kansas, and obviously all the stuff going on with football in the portal, with guys who are in like playoff games, backup quarterbacks going to the portal. Are we in a different era now, where it's sort of like doesn't matter as much, and you don't get the 5-year window of time to ramp a program or to keep momentum building, and because of how much money is in the game aside from the coaches now? So I think that's sort of where I'm coming from, is like, it's great that everyone's learning, and growth mindset, right? Mindset. We're all about mindset, except when we lose, we can't let go of it, and we can't stop obsessing over the loss to the point where you cost yourselves the Davidson game, Kim's own words. So I just am struggling with where he is as a coach in year 2 at the high major level. Is it fair to assume that he should be better, or is this where he should be in year 2? He's in his mid-30s. He's only been coaching for what, 10 years at most, maybe even less with all the
Like
assistants.
8 years maybe.
Yeah. So are we putting too much on him? I don't know that we are, but I'm just thinking out loud. State of the program, where is everyone at right now?
Well,
Well,
I mean, you want to go, Brian?
no, you can go.
Okay. I think, like I don't know what I expected. I think I knew that, usually no one's ready at 34 to coach a major conference program. And it's hard because I think maybe the hope was that his mind for what works in basketball, which I think is sound, like the kind of shots you should be getting and the kind of shots you should be allowing, this and is I think is correct. His even in a time when there's been struggles and inconsistency, this team has still done a good job of like applying the principles of mid-range shots are not good shots generally. Let's limit them unless we have to or are wide open. Let's force the other team to do that. Get them off the 3-point line and get them into the mid-range. It's like kind of oversimplistic, but it isn't a mathematical advantage, right? When you can allow more mid-range shots than you take. So he has some principles about how basketball works best that I think I would agree with. And he has the youth and charisma and doesn't have the same kind of like bogged down by the transition of the sport that others have, like older coaches who are either retiring or really struggling with NIL and the transfer portal and that sort of thing. He never has those kind of comments about like how that works, like and how the system works now. The problem is that in an age of NIL and transfer portal, things change very quickly, much more quickly than the past. And even, look at Brian's mentioned Rick Barnes. He had 2 years where he had kind of like bubble teams or maybe played better bubble teams that made the tournament and lost in the first round. And then he had 3 years of teams that didn't play very well, particularly I think Eric Murdoch's last year, and then the 2 years after Eric Murdoch left. Again, Rick Barnes joining at a very similar time in age-wise as Kim English. And then in '94, it all kind of came together. And they, even though they actually didn't have a great season, they won the Big East tournament. We were an 8-9 seed in the NCAA tournament. Again, lost in the first round. And then Rick Barnes left. I think we can kind of see something similar here. Rick came in and he had a lot to learn. He had a style where they played fast and they scored a lot of points. And I think that's the same thing as Kim English. I mean, I think the difference is like, what's the trajectory of the program when every year everyone can leave? Like, what would Rick Barnes' era have been like if Michael Smith and Dickie Simpkins and Michael Brown and Rob Phelps and all those guys could have left at any time much more easily, right? Or Eric Murdoch left. Like, what if, in reality, right? Like, Rick Pitino comes in, leaves rather. Gordy Chiesa comes in. Rick Barnes comes. By the time Rick Barnes is there's almost no chance that Paco Screen and Eric Murdoch are still on the team. They're probably going to be transferring somewhere else. Because of the one-time transfer rule, Kim English is able to keep Devin Carter and Bryce Hopkins. That rule doesn't exist anymore. And I think that this is the problem with this era. Like, it's such a momentum based that when the momentum stalls, and let's face it, it's stalled at Providence. Doesn't mean it can't get started again. Doesn't mean by the end of the season there might not be momentum into the off season and next season. But have momentum going into the spring, it makes it a lot harder. It makes it harder to convince players that you are the right guy to help transform their career and maybe get them paid in Europe or in the NBA. It makes it harder to convince donors to donate money to bring in that next guy that'll put you over the top. It's just not the same as like saying I have a recruiting class and I have some junior college transfers and we'll go get them next season. It still makes it easier to turn it around when you make mistakes, right? So that's a positive. Maybe there were some mistakes in player evaluation this year, and that's part of learning on the job too. And this year they'll make better decisions in the transfer portal. Like that's the hope. The hope is Kim English is a smart young guy who has a lot of good ideas about basketball, relates to kids, willing and humble enough to learn. Now we just see it go into place and turn in. It's not to poo-poo everything that happened last year, but this is a new year, and it's just not going very well.
It's funny. We talk about the age, and I had used that myself. I don't want to say a crutch, but I did do some looking, and you make a great point about how it's a different era now. But if you look at our history, Joe Mulaney, Dave Gavitt, Rick Pitino, Rick Bonds, skipping Pete Gillen, then you go to Tim Welch, Keno, all started between 32 and 36 as the head coach at Providence. And Kim is 34 when he started. It's actually been the way it's been. Now, they've all had varied levels of experience, so obviously it's not a fair comparison. But one of the things that gets me a little nervous is the idea that we get so stuck to our system or his system. I looked at Ed Cooley's years, and again, a lot of people were very quick to criticize, but he did make the NCAA's. 8 of his last 10 years, he was in the NIT. His second year, and then one other year. He made the NCAA's with a team that averaged just over 80 points a game, and he also made the NCAA's with another team that averaged under 70 points a game. And he seemed to have this ability to adapt to his players. They were going to be quicker, shooting quicker, slow it up. He went with going a small lineup where he had, playing a small five where he had big guys, where he played sometimes with 2 big guys on the court with Kadeem Batts and Carson DeRocher. He basically melded his philosophy to the players that he had that given year. And I did, I looked yesterday. I drove my wife nuts at dinner as we spent our entire dinner with the TV looking at video of Wesley Cadet from last year highlights. And again, they're highlights. But you saw what he could do. And it doesn't seem that he's been put in that position at all this year. A big part of his game was that mid-range jumper. You'd see him, he'd drive to the basket, stop short, and pull up with that 10, 12-footer. And if people started laying off him, then he'd shoot the 3. And if they got close, he'd just try and go all the way to the basket. And, the idea you were talking about how, obviously statistically a 3-pointer is you get more value than a mid-range 2-pointer. But if your player can't do it, it doesn't really help. And this weekend, I watched Saturday night, I watched my Grand Canyon Antelopes blow a game to Georgia. And then Sunday, I watched Northwestern play. In both games, the commentators were talking about Bryce Drew and Chris Collins, and they had the exact same comment talking about the new way of playing basketball, which is all trying to just either layups or 3-pointers. And both Coach Drew and Coach Collins had the exact same comment. If my player's best part of his game is that 12-footer, I'm not taking the tool out of his toolbox. I was paraphrasing slightly there. But they both had that same thought, and it's like, we don't have a player who does that 10 to 12-footer. And I understand, again, the analytics show that it's not the best thing in general, but it might be the best thing for this player. And, I'm not picking on Wesley Cadet because I think he's probably not being appreciated for what he's done. But I think there's something to the fact that you've got to look at what you have and find a way to put them in the best position to succeed. And we just seem to be more hit and miss than I'd like so far.
And one thing to add to that is, ideas are important, but being a college basketball coach is a lot about leadership, a lot about making guys comfortable. a lot about making guys helping guys be confident, driving guys to perform, and I think that, and also pulling teams out of tailspins or just runs of not as good play. I guess my one of my my hopes, along with the fact that I think he's Kim English is teachable and he's learning, and it's hard when you're in the thick of it to like learn all the lessons immediately. It might take some time. It might, we don't have a lot of time, but it might take some time. But I do think what we saw last year was, Bryce Hopkins went down against Seton Hall. They lost a really tough game there. They went on the road to Creighton. They came back in that game and made it close, and then lost there. They got it all the way down to 1 point with about 5 minutes to go, even though they were down, I think, by like 18 at one point earlier in the game. And then they immediately come back 4 days later and go to St. John's, and they had a tough game there. And then they had a 3-pointer at the buzzer to try to win that game. 3 hard losses in a row. And you're like, oh, man, this is tough. And they come home against Xavier, not a great Xavier team. They got blown out by 20. And you're thinking, man, this is done. Like we're done. But to Kim English's credit, and also to Devin Carter and Joshua Duro and Jaden Pierre and Tickett and Corey and all those guys, Rich Barron, they came out of it and they won 7 of 10 games. They played tough at Connecticut in the loss and at Butler in the loss, 2 of those 3 losses. They won the rest of the games, including at Xavier, at home against St. John's, and home against Creighton. And then they went to the Big East tournament and won 2 games. And even without, basically everyone playing its full strength, they played, Marquette pretty well in the semifinals. So, like, it's hard after losses. It's hard when we've seen now 5 losses in a span of, 7 games, to feel positivity. But, and especially when we have this kind of Bryce Hopkins looming thing about, like, he plays for a few games and then he sits. Like, are we going to have that reliability? I do at least say that, like, players are resilient. Coaches can be resilient. We saw players that are on this team this year be resilient last year. We saw the same coaching staff be resilient last year. So I think there is a resilience, and the grime and the yuck, as kind of Kimberly says, that fans go through after a loss is nothing compared to what the players go through. I really recommend Pat Conroy's book, My Losing Season, about his last year at the Citadel as a basketball player. Great novelist, Prince of Tides, because it showed, like, kind of how a player sees the game. Kind of a mediocre backup point guard, probably should have been playing more, and it's like every game, it's just like, we see it and we kind of live and die with it, but these players are living and dying with it, and so are the coaches. And so I think I just want to, like, it could be better on Friday. It could be. And the coaches are doing what they can, the players are doing what they can, and I have some hope that, like, that, these players and coaches are resilient, and that's what I'm looking for on Friday.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always positive. And despite, what I just said, there's nothing that I'm not seeing anything to say that we can't just turn this around, because I've said from the beginning, I think we have the talent, and I mentioned, the guys that we brought in have a track record. We know what they can do. And, if we get everything working together, and it's not easy, and like you said, the whole situation with Bryce, I'm sure it's very hard on him, and it's hard on his teammates, and it's hard on the staff. But it's probably pretty close to coming together. One of our viewers, the brilliant Andrew McNaughton, the better of the McNaughton brothers, mentioned that we got the next 3 games with St. John's, Marquette, and UConn. It could be a disaster, but it could also be a great jumping point. You win 2 of 3, or 3 of 3 there, you've really built something, and you're going into the new year in much better shape, and you forget about the losses we've had. There's also the opposite that could happen, but I don't see any reason to bring that up at this point.
Andrew also had another comment that he wants you to show off the jacket. So.
It's not a jacket; it's my custom-made shirt here. I had it custom made. It's from the Friar Dom collection, and if I can wear this in public, it shows what kind of Friar fan I am.
A little moment of levity to break up the despair. But I think, we can move on to the previewing Friday. I think just one thing I just wanted to talk about, because I think it's sort of been there's more noise than usual about this this particular topic, and I wonder what your quick thoughts maybe are on this. Do we think that what do we think Ryan Mila needs to do to get on the court more?
Well, I mean, I think I've been, not everyone reads my Discord writing, but those who have known that I've been pretty high on Ryan. Like, I had a conversation with folks that we both know in March at the Big East tournament, talking about Ryan and talking about how, I thought he would be like a 9th man this year. Most people thought he'd be like the 13th man, right? I think that it's important to note that he did have a back injury in the offseason. He didn't have the regular summer with the team and the preparation. He doesn't maybe even still have his game legs. Nonetheless, he's been maybe at worst the 3rd best player on a per minute basis in the team. Probably behind Bryce and maybe behind Bensley. Jaden is like in the mix too, but he's been one of those guys. I think what I'm looking for, if it is wind, then he should start, because if you start, that means you have the most time to like rest. Because if you're starting, that means that you get the first break, and so you can come back in sooner. So I think he should start. I thought he should start for a couple of games now. The thing that makes Ryan really great is that he knows how to play. He knows how to pass and move. He has a lot of confidence, and I think it shows. And the other thing is he's really good he's a really good defensive rebounder too. Like, that's the other thing. I could imagine lineups when Bryce is healthy where Mila plays the 4 and Bryce plays the 5, because he's a good enough defensive rebounder and he holds his own in the post on defense. And he just moves the ball better than anyone else on the team, I think, when it comes to passing. He doesn't stick with him. It kind of is more like, we hear Kim English say this. I don't know when we've seen it. He's like, if you're open, shoot it. If you're not open, pass it and move. Pass it and cut. That's what he does. Like, or he drives too. It's not one of the things that Kim usually says. But so my perspective is, what does he need to do to play more? Nothing. He needs to do nothing. He needs to, and the defense, he played more on Saturday, and the defense as a whole was not good. I don't know how much we can blame Ryan Mila for that. It was mostly his guard defense, I think. Jaden Pierre didn't have his best defensive game for sure. But that's the one thing that coaches might be seeing in film, is that, hey, here's one stat I saw, or I looked up. This is the most points per possession that Providence has allowed in a game against a non-power conference team since December 2009. 1.2. That was against George Washington under Keno Davis in his second year. This was the most points per possession they'd allowed since then. And so maybe that's part of it. That's the only other thing that I would say on Ryan. I love his game. I think he should start.
And before Brian, if you jump in, I'm showing on the screen here. This is from evanmedia.com. He's in 2 of the top 4 rated lineups over there in terms of the lineup rating that he uses, which I think wasn't even really the case maybe 10 days ago. So even just getting more opportunity, he's climbing the list because he's producing things like defensive rebounding, for example, something that will be very needed against St. John's, who is a good offensive rebounding team.
I don't have all the detailed stats in that. I know watching the game, unlike Brendan, I don't really care whether he starts or not, but there's no reason he shouldn't be playing 20 minutes-ish a game as a base. I mean, when he's out there, good things happen. There's some guys that you just kind of look at and they're like basketball players. I remember when during his freshman year, a different Ryan Gomes, sat the first 7 games they were going to redshirt him, and they were desperate and they just threw him into the game. And I forget what he scored, 12 points or something. But it wasn't that. It was that he got a couple of rebounds. He brought energy. He just made the other team be accountable to him. And when Ryan Mealer's on the court, you have to be accountable to him. Like you said, he's a good defensive rebounder. It's more than that because, like Bryce, he'll get the rebound and take off with it. He's not holding the ball and waiting for somebody else to come to him to bring the ball up court. He grabs the rebound and he's looking to move. I don't know, how his advanced metrics stand defensively, but I mean, he made 2 really good plays defensively. One where he forced the turnover that they ended up knocking. I think it was Bensley Joseph picked it up and took it in. And then he had another one where the guy was driving, he cut him off. I think he can live with some growing mistakes, and I suspect just by the way he plays, he's somebody, the more he plays, the better he'll get. That's always been one of my arguments with Corey Floyd, that when he's on the court, the more minutes he's playing, the more good things tend to happen. And I see that with Ryan, and whether it's starting or coming off the bench, I don't see how you can watch the games and not think that the Friars look better with him on the court. I think it's that simple.
Yeah, I think that's well said. So we'll see. I know there was a rumored comment by Kim at an event, I think today or yesterday, so that could lead people to think that the lineup may be shifting around on Friday. So we will see what happens. But to that point, and I think something too that will be a juxtaposition, because this is something we were talking about in the Discord before, is when you think back to the hiring process, both Kim English and Rick Pitino were available at the same time, in theory. They were both guys that could have been hired by Steve Napolillo. Whether you believe that that's actually true in terms of did Nap have the ability, really? Would that have gotten through Father Sicard or not is sort of anyone's guess. You hear a lot of different things from different people. But you think back to sort of the dichotomy with a team that had been rolling, a program that had been rolling under Ed Cooley and had taken themselves to another stratosphere in terms of the program's funding and backing and ability to compete in the Big East. And then you see a guy like Rick Pitino, who is obviously a proven winner everywhere he's been. And Brian shared a stat, I think, about his second-year record in his career as a coach, which is ridiculously good. And he's having a great second year after kind of an up and down first year, where he was figuring things out a little bit about who the players were on the team and guys he thought maybe going into the year were going to be important pieces, maybe weren't as important as the season went on. This year he seems to have a little bit more of a feel. They're 9-2. Although I will say, just like Providence was before the last week or so, they're 7-0 in the United States. They're only 9-8 and 8-0 in the United States. I think they went 1-2 in the Bahamas. They lost to Baylor in double overtime in a game that was very, very entertaining. I was watching that one live at a bar in New York City after a lovely steak dinner at Bobby Van's a few weeks ago. And then beat Virginia, lost to Georgia on a neutral in that tournament to go 1-2, which is the Baha Mar event, I believe, the week before. Providence was in the Bahamas. And but other than that, clean sheet. They are they're pushing the pace extensively. They're in the top 20 in average possession length in terms of how short it is. Their offense is ranked 21st in adjusted efficiency. Defense is ranked 11th in adjusted efficiency, so a really good combination of things there. They also, as I mentioned, offensive rebounding. They're right now have a 40% offensive rebounding percentage, good for 11th at KenPom. And but the other thing that they're really good at, which could play in Providence's favor a little bit, is they take a lot of far twos, mid twos tonight in the shellacking against DePaul. At home, they won 89-61 Tuesday night here against DePaul. Shot 55% from the field, but 12 of 24, I think, if I saw that correctly. Let me go back and check. 12 of 24 on mid-range. So 24 mid-range shots. Feels like a ton. They also took a ton at the rim. So they were 22 of 33 at the rim. So that is – they only took 10 threes. So it feels like that could be something that could stylistically work in Providence's favor. Obviously, the rebounding piece not as much, but I was kind of getting at in the beginning of this ramble was the dichotomy. If you think of where things were to where things are, you bring in a coach like Kim English in his mid-30s with very little experience. And Brian made this point earlier. It's not totally foreign to Providence to have a coach be young and in the early stages of his career. My pushback argument on that would be this is not the same Providence program of 40 years ago when their gym was a closet in the basement of the Slavin Center. So I think that the expectations have raised, and there's obviously questions like not that necessarily should they have hired Petito, although I know some people are saying that. But it's just interesting to kind of think about coming into this matchup. There's always a lot of nostalgia when Patino's involved. He has continued to say he has great love for Providence College. His son is a graduate of Providence College, Richard Patino. So in terms of on the court, I think RJ Lewis had a great game tonight. Sort of a mercurial player, seems to have great games or bad games. And the key off-season pickup, I think, for them out of the portal was Kadari Richmond, who from Seton Hall, who I think has taken a little time to get his feet under him. Although tonight he had 18 points and 7 15, only 4 of 8 at the line. Zuby Ejiofor is one of their better big men who had a really good preseason and early season, and I think started to open some eyes. He has one of the higher block rates in America, I think top 40 in block rate. Davion Smith was another key pickup out of the portal. Really good, guard player for them, who I think some people thought might be their best player coming into the year out of the portal. And then it's sort of a mix of other guys off the bench. Jaden Glover, Simeon Wiltshire, Aaron Scott has been pretty good, I would say, overall. Pretty low turnover guy in a decent amount of usage. So I don't know who wants to start on St. John's.
Well, I'll just jump in, maybe hopefully quickly. I'll say that, Rick Pitino obviously was an early revolutionary when it came to the three-point shot at Providence with Delray Brooks and Billy Donovan and others. His teams do not shoot the three. They're not a good three-point shooting team. Aaron Scott is an okay shooter. Simeon Wiltshire is a pretty good shooter. Davon Smith and RJ Lewis are kind of willing to take some of those shots. And Brady Dunlap when he comes in the game, but they're not a three-point shooting team. Like you said, they're what I call a shot volume team. If you look at the game tonight against DePaul, they took 16 more shots than DePaul. They took 26 more two-pointers, 10 fewer three-pointers. There are a couple reasons for that. One reason is they forced turnovers. DePaul turned the ball over 20 times, led by Connor Enright, who's kind of like a sieve. And then NJ Benson, they combined for 6 turnovers. The other reason is because, and to note, Davon Smith, Kadari Richmond are guys that are really good actually forcing steals. RJ Lewis is pretty good at it too, as is Simeon Wiltshire. So they have some guards that can force turnovers, which is definitely a problem for Providence. The other part about it is their offensive rebounding. They had 17 offensive rebounds, led by Richmond with 5 and Ejiofor with 4. And this is not new for them. They're 11th nationally in offensive rebounding. They're 42nd nationally in forced turnovers. They get a lot more shots than their opponents. And because of that, they can kind of afford to have lower shot value per shot, some of those mid-range shots, right? Take fewer threes because they're just getting a ton more shots than their opponents. And so even though a guy like RJ Lewis is coming off the bench, he's been one of the best players in the country this year. Can I say that? Ken Pomeroy has him listed 8th in National Player of the Year voting. Like his ranking, his formula may be too high, but he's been really, really good. High usage, high efficiency, offensive rebounders, block some shots. And that's another thing about this team. 11th nationally in defense. They don't just force turnovers. They defend the rim. They're 8th in the nation in shot block rate. And that's led primarily by Zuby Ejiofor, who's 35th nationally. But Kadari and RJ Lewis both get those block shots as well. I mean, I think that St. John's, they had a blip, a 1-point loss in double OT, like you mentioned, a 3-point loss in neutral court in a third game in 4 days. No excuses, whatever, win the games, but they're really good. And besides the fact that they're not a great shooting team, and maybe Providence can force them into a lot of those 2-pointers that they miss, and if we can hold our own on the glass and not go over, I think it could be a game. But this is a tough team, and would be a very big win for the Friars if they can get it. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned the 2 losses. I mean, Baylor is one of the most talented teams in the country, and I mentioned I watched Georgia the other night beat Grand Canyon. I mean, they're a very good team, and they're a very big and very physical team. They got 2 of the best freshmen in the country with Asa Newell and Santos Ariel. Not an easy matchup, not anything similar to what we're putting on the floor, but I really like this St. John's team. Every time I watch them, I get more impressed. Even when they lost, I mean, they had some droughts, but they came back. They fought hard against Baylor and the Georgia game. One thing that kind of reminds me a little of the '87 Friars. Everybody remembers Billy Donovan and Delray Brooks, but Rick Pitino had a great ability on that team to get different players to come out in different games and do something big. A lot of people forget, in the Georgetown game, Billy Donovan had 20 points, but I think he was 18 of 18 or 16 of 18, must have been, from the foul line. And it was all at the end when they had the lead and they were trying to foul him and he kept the ball in his hands. Billy Donovan actually took 4 shots in that game. And it was Darrell and Steve Wright and Abdul Shamsuddin, I think it was, and Marty Conlon came off the bench and all put up big points. He has a way of finding players. Pop Lewis was always strong, as you mentioned. But this year, like I said, he's pulling guys out. I mean, Brady Dunlap, one game had 18 points. Aaron Scott had a few big games. Tonight, I think he took 1 shot. It just seems that he's able to pull guys. RJ, he's changing his starting lineups to match who they're playing against. Sometimes he wants to, it's not a punishment, even though he did have some problems with Davon Smith early in the year. But like he wanted RJ Lewis to come in and watch the game first and see where he could attack. He comes off the bench and scores 19 points. They've got plenty of weapons, and like I said, you can't plan for just 1 or 2. If we stop this guy, we're in good shape. I think it's one of those things where you have to be prepared that somebody you're not expecting is going to come up with a big game out of the blue. I think my preseason pick had them second in the Big East to Creighton before their injuries. I think they're a legitimate threat to win the Big East. So to beat them, I think would be a great signature win for Coach English and the team.
Yeah, and heading into a stretch now where they'd have, 10 days off between games, which is a little bit of an odd situation because I think some of the guys are taking finals now. So it's like oftentimes you'll get a break like this for finals, but I think that St. Bonaventure game kind of gets slid in due to some of the scheduling changes around the MT going to Atlantis this year, which maybe was not the best idea. One other thing, just to ask, we have another question here about Brian's outfits. Is Brian wearing the Friar pants? I don't think so.
No, I'm wearing black and white Snoopy pants tonight, so it's kind of working. Matches, keeps the theme going.
But yeah, so Providence will then after this game have a little bit of a break. So I feel like some of the momentum building, maybe not quite there in terms of how you would normally traditionally see it, but I think having the ability to go 1-0 and not have a loss before your next game in 10 days, I think would do a lot for the psyche of both the team and the fan base, because it feels like every week we come on here and it's like mostly negative, even though they did win a game, but they lost a game, and a game that they either shouldn't have lost or that it was heartbreaking to lose, being a rivalry game against URI. So I think it's a little bit of, is the AI coming in here? He's talking now. He's got a question.
Yeah, I think we should ignore the AI.
Probably.
He's having a bad day.
Yeah,
He's having as much trouble as Tyler Lekolak figuring out what we're writing in the chat.
It's a good callback. Final thing for me on St. John's, I think it's really probably as simple as Providence probably has to make threes. and has to at least limit offensive rebounds. And then I think their defense is good enough to disrupt at the rim and feed into the mid range, but in a more contested way. And I think there is, I mean, they're going to be an underdog in this game at home by probably, if you believe, reading into like the Ken Palms of the world and those folks, probably around 3 points, 3.5 points, something like that. So, it's probably going to come down to like they're not going to be able to, I don't think, have a start like they did against St. Bonaventure and have a comeback against a team like St. John's, because they have so much ability to speed you up and force more turnovers. And I think it'd just be a lot harder to come back on a team like St. John's. So I think it's imperative to get a fast start. And then I know that I mentioned earlier about that kind of comment that has been floating around the internets. I don't know if it was just in the Discord or elsewhere, but it potentially seeing some lineup shifting for Friday, whether it's a starting lineup or just generally different lineups, whether it's Ryan Mila or we're going to see maybe some more bonk going on. Probably not. But just, I think maybe Kim's at a place where he's going to just be looking for anything that helps them start fast. And honestly, maybe just run like 5 plays to start the game. Like have a pre-planned. We're gonna run this play that we know we can get good looks. We watched the film, like we saw this, that, the other from last year. Here's like 3 like slam dunk plays, maybe literally plays that we know we're gonna get good looks. Just to try to get, maybe it's to get a certain guy going, maybe it's to get a lob if it's Oswin in the middle or something, just to kind of get their feet under them so that they don't feel like it's they're going to struggle to score, and then they're going to have a slow start, and then St. John's runs it up a little bit, and then you're playing from behind again, which I don't think, unless they're going to start banging threes, which is possible, it's going to be really hard to come back on this St. John's team.
One of the things that I mentioned about how we have different players, but I think if there's one guy that kind of scares me that could go off on Friday, and I'm hoping I'm wrong, is Davon Smith. He's been very much up and down. He had a problem in one of the games. He refused to go in. He ended up getting suspended for a game, and then he was coming off the bench for a couple more, but he was back in the lineup. But the reason I worry about him is he's an aggressive, physical guy, even though he's small. And I looked at the last 3 close losses. The Davidson and Indiana, there's not much to say. We were beaten from minute 1 to minute 40. But the other 3 games, we went up against Kobe Elvis, Sebastian Thomas, and Melvin Council, who are all nice players, but I don't think anybody has them on their All-America teams or anything at that level. And in the second half, they scored 14, 17, and 14 points respectively against us. And I can just see him as the kind of a guy that if he thinks he's got a step, he's going to keep trying to push and blow by, mainly Jaden, I would assume, would be guarding him right from the start. He's an aggressive rebounder. He gets putbacks. That's the guy that I would say that if we're going to worry about one guy that could really go off as a surprise, I mean, you know what Karadari Richmond is. You kind of have an idea what Zuby's going to be, but he's the guy I think could be their wild card that we need to watch out for.
That's what happens when you try to tweet while you're on a live show.
I kind of like
my
the
mic down.
keyboard.
So I think we're now in a place where we can remember a guy. I feel like this is the most discussed topic on the internet every week. Everyone wants to know that people are clamoring every week. Who are we going to remember?
Tonight we're remembering Maris Laxa. You might know Maris Laxa as a very tall, skinny basketball player who shot a lot of 3-pointers in the Tim Welsh era. I almost called him Kim Welsh. He was on both of Tim Welsh's NCAA tournament teams. There weren't a whole lot of players that could say that. He was brought in alongside Chris Anrin. Maris Laxa was Latvian. Chris Anrin was Swedish, and then later Tuka Koti that was Finnish, that was brought in by Tim Welsh. in the early 2000s. And Laxa was kind of a revelation, especially as a freshman. He maybe had maybe at his best year as a freshman, where he shot 46% on 3-pointers, scored 9 points a game. He was very tall. He's about 6'9", listed, and very thin. His sophomore year, his shooting went down, and then it came back up again as a junior, and he kind of fell off and was injured as a senior. But he was a guy who helped that 2001 team. And if we remember the Tim Walsh era, they had not made the NCAA tournament his first 3 years. They had the big fight off campus in that stretch, and things were not looking very good entering 2001. But somehow that team became a very surprising second place team in the Big East. Probably should have been much higher than a 10 seed, but we're 10 deep. And Maris Laxa was one of those 10, and he was their fifth leading scorer. They had 10 guys averaging at least 9 guys averaging 4.6 points per game. I think they had 10 guys averaging at least 12 minutes a game that year. That was a truly deep team that could go kind of with 2 sets of 5 players that they really needed to. And Laxa was a big part of that team being an NCAA tournament team. He was not as instrumental in the 04 team, but even in the 02-03 team, which was kind of a bounce back year for Tim Welsh, where they played well in the Big East tournament and made a little run in the NIT, he was a very core part of that team. And a pivot from Tim Welsh, who hadn't early in his time at Providence really recruited overseas very much. It's not that I can recall in 98, 99, 2000, but was able to bring in some foreign players, and Tuga Koti became one of the more important players on the 04 and 05 team for sure. What do you remember about Maris, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much covered it. He played, I think, 20 minutes a game as a freshman, from what I remember looking up. He was the guy his freshman year that everybody thought was going to be the next player at PC, from what I remember, just because nobody had 6'9" forwards who could shoot threes. For whatever reason, it didn't happen his sophomore year. He played more, he lost his shot, and then his junior year he got it back, and then, like I said, his senior year he was injured and never really got a hold of it. He did actually play for the Latvian national team after that, and he played 10 years of basketball over in Europe. He played in Greece. He finished up in Estonia. He won a couple of championships on the Estonian team, and I think he was an assistant coach for the Latvian team 1 year with his father. But he was a guy, like I said, everybody thought he was the next big guy as a freshman. And, he had a nice enough career, just never happened the way that people thought it would.
And seems to be living in the UK right now. So exciting times. I have a clip here. Thanks to Friar TV, as always. So let me try to share this.
And this clip is more to get people to see what he looked like and what is because what you're going to see is he's going to drive, which wasn't really one of his strengths. You see John Lenahan holding the ball right here. He's going to drive and get fouled, which didn't really happen that much either. But then you're going to get a nice little close up of him at the foul line. This is against Boston College in, I believe, 2002, which would have been his sophomore season. You can see he gets hacked by that's Ryan Sidney, I think. Sidney very impressed with the call.
Here we go. Gotta get rid of the ads.
We got to get YouTube Premium.
I guess.
Hey, donate in the YouTube for and we can use that money to fund YouTube Premium, guys. Anyway, he went to the foul line here, made a couple foul shots. We could have found probably him making a 3-pointer this game, but there are not a lot of highlights of Maris Laxa on YouTube. In this one, we get, unfortunately, a fair amount of Ryan Sidney and Al Skinner. But what you are going to get here is to see what he looked like. He was at the line, and I think he made both these free throws. And it was a pretty fun team. They have Marcus Douthat's over there, John Lenahan. We got Sheku Kaba, I think, is there in the backcourt, too. These are the interesting Providence jerseys. I don't think we had them very long. But yeah, there's the dunk. Rob Sanders out there. Yeah, the Friars. I don't remember if they won this game. They had a fairly large lead in the first half. I can look this up as we're looking, but I think let's see, home game against BC.
We're up 2.
Yeah,
Up 1 with 2 seconds left.
I think we might have won by 3, 64-61. So
Yep.
that was February 2nd, 2002. Providence won that game to go to 4-5 in conference. They would only win 2 more times the rest of the season. It was John Lenahan's final season, and his final game that year it was in the Big East tournament against Georgetown, where he had like a running drive to try to win the game down by 1 and missed, and he ended his career with a 1-point loss to the Hoyas on the 2002 Big East tournament. But this isn't about John Lenahan, well remembered assistant coach at BYU. This is about Maris Laxa, the Latvian sniper from deep, who made 2 NCAA tournament Friars teams in his 4 years, which is not something that we saw very much prior to your Jalen Lindsays and Chris Dunns and people like that.
He did finish with over 700 points in his career. So I mean, that's a credible career. And our good friend Dennis Burns, who's the smartest person we have in the PCBB 1917 Discord, pointed out that if you look on the BC bench next to Coach Skinner, there's a guy who looked familiar in Providence a few years later.
Yeah, Cooley coached at Boston College from 1997 to 2006. His last assistant job before he became the head coach of Fairfield, and I don't know. He was there for 5 years. I don't know what became of him after those 5 years, but I hope he's doing well wherever he is at Cooley.
I think we nailed it, and even though it was a day late, I think we delivered. So hopefully everyone enjoyed the episode. We were live on X or Twitter and Facebook and YouTube this evening. So if you want to catch us next time when we go live, subscribe to the YouTube channel. It'll give you a little notification bell to click so that you'll be notified when we go live on X. I think it just pops up in your notification feed if you're following me that when I go live. Join the Discord if you want to come hang out with us, and we will see you next week, hopefully to discuss 1-0, no losses, and we can talk about some fun and festive things heading into a little bit of a break for this Providence team.